The last 2 jobs that I've gotten, I've moved from South Africa to Germany and then later South Africa to Sweden. Through this process, I've learned a ton about interviewing with international companies. And today's video is going to unpack how we can use our unique natural tendencies we have from our home country to differentiate ourselves within the interviewing process with international organizations. And we're also going to touch on some of the very useful tools that can speed up and make this a lot easier to identify. If you stay with me until the end of this video, I promise not to go on a tangent about this broken recruitment system in this corporate industrial complex that we are living in. We already know from the previous video that in interviewing, it's really important that we prepare, that we communicate well, and that we get our personality across. Understanding organizational and country culture fits into that preparation bucket. And then actioning what we find from that falls into the communication and the personality bucket. The goal here is to not only highlight these unique natural tendencies that we have and show how they can be really useful and valuable for organizations, but also how to mitigate some of the bias that we might have purely from how we interact with people from where we come from. This is important because organizations love to say that they want diverse candidates, but they are not very good at eliminating the bias that they have within the recruitment process or even understanding why they want diverse candidates to begin with. When I say bias, I don't mean outright discrimination based off of any apparent demographic like your name, your age, how you look, your religion, and so on. What I'm talking about is a more subliminal, even unconscious bias that exists, where from just some of the characteristics we show, some of the interactions we have, some of our speech mechanisms, someone might intimate something from us, and they don't even recognize that they're doing this. It's a natural part of being human. We have these heuristics and shortcuts in our brain that allow us to more fluidly interact in specific situations. So how do we go about identifying potential biases that we could introduce? But more importantly, how do we go about identifying those 1, maybe even 2 points that if we can demonstrate would show quite a high value to an organization? Well, this comes down to research. You could do this the manual old school way, or you could use our friend Chat GPT. I like Chat GPT because it is accessible to most people with an internet connection. It's not hidden behind a paywall. And that is super important for me and how I produce my content. Something I recently learned about Chat GPT is that you can activate a certain lens or perspective in a conversation. So in this instance, we're going to ask it to be our anthropologist assistant. We're going to prompt it from this point on in the conversation, you will act as an anthropologist. This is going to give us insight into the behavior within different cultures. Can you give me some behavioral insight into the general culture within my home country? Can you compare it with the country I'm going into? Then it's going to give us a list of some cultural elements that are present within those locations. We can also narrow it down and input business culture into our prompt. That's going to give us some more nuance into the business specific culture. And now comes in some of the work we have to do ourselves, which is we need to read through all of these points and note which ones we identify with. There'll be points on both sides. And then we need to note which ones we kind of disagree with for ourselves, the things that are off-putting or make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. We're going to have to use our intuition a little bit here to identify the big differences and where we could be of value within the organization that we're going into. An example from me and my South Africanness is that in South Africa, I'm actually quite a middle of the range outgoing person. I'm not overly outgoing, but I'm also not very to myself. Whereas if you take me and put me in Sweden, you'll find that I'm one of the more outgoing people within that environment. So then you plump me in that room and I start to chat with people and understand their context and where they come from. And then everybody feels the same permission within that room to connect and engage. That's going to be of huge value for the organization because it's just one of my natural tendencies that will add a point of difference that has some kind of ripple effect. To mitigate bias within the interviewing process, you're going to review the same lists and see what might not be of value for an organization. Some of these things you want to avoid in the interactions that you have within the company. Some of them you can bring back in at a later time when they are more familiar with you as a person and what you can do for them. And others you might find are developmental opportunities that you can work on once you're in the organization. And this is a nice point because often you get asked, what is one of your weaknesses? And then you can say, well, it's not quite a weakness, but I've noticed based on the culture that I come from that I have this tendency. And that's something I'd really like to work on in your organization because I see you have this sort of tendency. Is that the case? And then you can have a conversation about that. Ooh, tick box. Some questions that you can ask yourself as you're going through this research process is, what does the organization say? And this is where you're going to look on their website, you're going to look at what the product releases they have, their social media, and see how they interact with people in terms of their culture and their values. Then you can go and look at what does it show. Look at the imagery that they have and their products. So many people ignore the gut feeling that they have from the interactions with organizations, and that is the worst thing you can do for yourself. So from the feeling element, you're going to understand, does action follow their imagery and their words? So we want to ascertain, is there a difference between what they say they're going to do and their culture and their values, and what do they actually do? So if there's something about high performance in their values and the recruiter is taking 4 days or 5 days to actually respond to a question, then that is not a high performance culture in my book. And lastly, of course, where is it situated? And that is going to allow us to kind of weave in the country and the organizational culture together. So the last word on this is it's important to recognize how country culture can moderate organizational culture and vice versa. To sum up, we have to prepare, as with any interview. But when you're interviewing with an international company, you might need to prepare a little bit differently by understanding the organizational culture and the country culture. This is going to help you understand how you can differentiate yourself by letting your natural tendencies from your culture, which you might just take for granted, shine. That could be of great value for an organization in a different country. Good luck. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any other perspectives on this. The next video is going to be an end-to-end of the talent journey. Whereas in the video with Chat GPT, we went through just a segment of the recruitment process. We're going to look at the holistic thing to see how it can elevate our careers. So subscribe for that and see you then.